Welcome to Master Crimes, your channel to explore some of the most mysterious and shocking cases in true crime history. If you love delving into unsolved mysteries, disturbing investigations, and the truth behind the most notorious cases, you've come to the right place. Don't forget to subscribe and join our passionate community as we uncover the dark side of reality. Today, we dive into a case that has left many searching for answers. The story of Bryan Kohberger. Accused of a brutal crime that shocked a small community, Kohberger is at the center of a mystery marked by tragedy, an intense investigation, and questions that remain unanswered. We'll dissect the details of the case, piece together the sequence of events, and explore the theories that continue to intrigue investigators and the public. So, let's dive in together and find out what really happened in the Bryan Kohberger case. Was he just a suspect in the wrong place? Or is there something more lurking beneath the surface? Let's find out. It was a night like any other, one of those in which the tranquility of routine seems to envelop everything. But for Bryan Kohberger, that night was not like the others. There were no clues that a nightmare was beginning. A nightmare made of mysteries, of hypotheses never confirmed, of shadows and secrets. Who was Bryan Kohberger really? And above all, what led him to do the unimaginable? Bryan Kohberger was a seemingly ordinary person, but with a hidden side that only those close to him could glimpse. Growing up in a small town, with a normal family and a seemingly quiet life, Bryan seemed like a boy like many others. Yet, the small details often tell a different story. His family was known for their discretion, for that ability to go unnoticed. But it was precisely this discretion that hid an emotionally cold environment. Bryan grew up in a world devoid of warmth, of that emotional connection that is essential for development. By the time he was a teenager, some of Bryan's behaviors had already begun to raise questions among those who knew him. Episodes of unmotivated violence against animals, an almost obsessive desire for control, and a lack of empathy towards anyone around him. But no one could have predicted the dark side that, over time, would emerge. There are cases that touch the deepest chords of our soul. The case of Bryan Kohberger is not only a criminal enigma, but a tragedy that destroyed 4 young lives, leaving a trail of indelible pain. That cursed night, 4 innocent students, 4 broken dreams, 4 families who never imagined waking up in a nightmare. The authorities intervened on the scene at dawn, called by an anonymous complaint. The officers who entered the house found themselves faced with a spectacle that they would remember forever. The rooms were filled with a deathly silence, interrupted only by the sound of the cautious footsteps of the investigators. In the house, there were 4 bodies, arranged in an eerie way, almost as if the killer had wanted to leave a message. The officers described a scene full of signs of violence, indicating that the victims had been taken by surprise and had no chance to defend themselves. There were clear signs of meticulous planning, as if every gesture had been calculated to the millimeter, leaving no room for improvisation. They were not just names on a file, but young people with dreams, ambitions, and lives yet to be lived. The 4 victims of this tragedy were college students with dreams, passions, and a bright future ahead of them. Their lives were intertwined through their studies and common friends. Let's see who they were and how this tragic event affected their families and community. Madison Mogan was a student known for her kindness and intelligence. She loved literature and dreamed of becoming a teacher. Her friends described her as someone who was always smiling, ready to help and spread positivity. Madison was also a girl who was very close to her family, with whom she shared a strong bond. Kaylee Goncalves was a lively girl with a passion for photography. She loved to travel, explore new places, and capture moments with her camera. She was also a talented student with a bright career ahead of her. Kaylee had ambitious plans for the future, and her tragic passing has left a huge void in the hearts of her friends and family. Xana Kernodle was an athlete and a young woman with a strong passion for sports. She was known for her determination and willpower. Xana had many friends and a very active social life. Her spirit and energy were contagious. Her loved ones remember her as a generous girl and always ready to help others. Ethan Chapin was a young man who was passionate about music and sports. He was a very sociable boy and loved by everyone who knew him. Ethan attended the same university as the other victims and was in a relationship with Xana. His loss was especially hard on his family, who had to deal with an unimaginable tragedy. The investigation immediately focused on every little detail in the hope of finding a trace, a clue that could explain the madness of that night. Some elements left on the scene were out of place, objects arranged in a strange way that did not make any logical sense. There was talk of a sort of ritual, of an obsession for control. The wounds on the bodies showed an unprecedented violence, but each blow had been inflicted with surgical precision, as if the killer had studied every move, leaving nothing to chance. Investigators speculated that the killer had personal knowledge of the victims, someone who had observed them, studied them, perhaps even spent time with them. It was as if he had felt a sense of dominion over them, a morbid need to possess them, even in death. But what drives an individual to commit such a brutal act? Investigators began to dig into Bryan Kohberger's past, his behavior, his relationships, looking for an answer. And over time, a disturbing picture emerged. Bryan was obsessed with the idea of control, of power over others. It was speculated that he had observed the victims for months, studying them, noting their every move. Perhaps he had developed a kind of fixation, a belief that he could control their life and death. His cold, calculating mind would have found satisfaction in turning these innocent young people into objects of a perverse game. Some experts have suggested that Bryan showed signs of malignant narcissism, a deep contempt for the lives of others, a sense of superiority that led him to consider others as tools to be manipulated. This could explain the coldness with which he acted, the meticulousness, the care in leaving no traces. The case of Bryan Kohberger and the 4 students has become one of the darkest and most complex of recent years. It is a mystery that has shocked public opinion and left an open wound in the hearts of those who knew Xana, Kaylee, Madison, Ethan. They, innocent victims of a dark mind, continue to live in the memories of those who loved them. But the questions remain. What really drove Bryan to commit such a cruel act? Was it just a fit of madness? Or is there something much darker behind it? Every time we talk about them, about those 4 young people who are no longer with us, we remember that behind the names, behind the statistics, there are people, stories, lives shattered. A case that remains, perhaps forever, without a definitive answer. From that moment on, the investigation began to raise more questions than answers. The hypotheses on what could have led Bryan to that gesture multiplied. Some investigators began to suspect that Bryan had not acted alone. There are witnesses who swear they saw a dark figure lurking nearby, someone who may have orchestrated everything behind the scenes, manipulating Bryan like a pawn. But who could it be, and why? Others, however, thought that the key to the mystery was in Bryan's mind. One specialist hypothesized that Bryan suffered from an undiagnosed psychotic disorder. He may have developed a sort of dissociation from reality, an emotional detachment that made him unable to understand the gravity of his actions. Finally, some speculated that there was a darker motive behind the act. Bryan could have harbored a vendetta or a secret obsession linked to events in the past, to people who had entered his life only to leave scars. What if it had all been part of a plan planned for years? But who is Bryan Kohberger really? Experts have tried to draw his psychological profile. Some describe him as a pathological narcissist, obsessed with control. Others speak of a cold man, incapable of empathy, with a distorted view of himself and others. Narcissism and need for control. Bryan showed a total lack of remorse. His desire for control did not only concern the people around him, but also the narrative of his own life. He was known to be a manipulator, able to lie without hesitation, to distort the truth and bend events to his wishes. Raised in an environment devoid of empathy, Bryan had learned to emotionally isolate himself from the world. His friendships were superficial, his relationships were unemotional. It is as if, over the years, he had cultivated a distorted image of himself, an image in which his desire for revenge, control, and power were legitimate, justified. An image that would lead him to live in a reality all his own. After his arrest, Bryan Kohberger's case made the rounds in the media, capturing the attention of the public. But despite the outcry, some details remained shrouded in mystery. Some key witnesses disappeared, evidence that seems to disappear into thin air, and versions of the facts that contradict each other. Many questions still unanswered. Is Bryan really guilty, or is he the victim of a game bigger than himself? The case of Bryan Kohberger remains one of the most enigmatic and obscure of recent times. It is a mystery that perhaps will never find a true solution, that will continue to raise questions, to make us question the nature of evil, the fragility of the human mind. And while we wonder what secrets are still hidden in the shadows, one thing is certain. Bryan Kohberger, with his impenetrable face and his enigmatic gaze, will continue to be one of the greatest enigmas of crime reporting. This story has taken us through twists and turns, shocking discoveries, and disturbing evidence, yet the full truth still seems elusive. Has justice truly been served, or are there still pieces of the puzzle missing? Only time will tell if we will ever know the full truth behind this complex and disturbing case. Thank you for watching this video and joining me in this exploration of true crime mysteries. If you enjoyed this video and want to stay up to date on other fascinating cases, be sure to like and subscribe to the Master Crimes channel. Your support helps me continue to investigate, analyze, and bring you the most interesting true crime stories from around the world. Let me know your theories in the comments. Together, let's continue to explore hidden truths and uncover new details.